All right, we'll go ahead and get started. As you can see, we are short. Our wisdom tonight is just me. Grant already threatened to leave. I understand. Real quick, just as a quick review, we talked about how there is truth, how it's knowable, how we arrive at that truth using logic and different things. We've talked about the things of the world, things of the constants of the universe, the anthropic constants, if I can remember the words, the things, anthropic, thank you, anthropic constants that have to be in order for us to survive. Remember, if you remember some of the things we talked about the O2 and the CO2 levels. We talked about the gravitational pull in relation to the moon. We talked about the thickness of the atmosphere, and really the positioning of all the planets in the universe. How it all plays into making this one small area inhabitable by us. So we're going to move on this week talking about the first life. The first life, how did it come to be? There's a lot of ideas out there, but we're going to talk about some of those ideas and what atheists have to say about both their views and about intelligent design. As always, start with our quote up there. God never performed a miracle to convince an atheist because his ordinary words provide sufficient evidence. We know that's true. We see that in Scripture. And we'll see a lot more of that as we move forward this week and in the coming weeks. I debated a lot about this first intro. If you have the book, you've read it, but this first intro really sets the stage for this chapter. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's really good to kind of set the mindset of this chapter. So here we go. 16-year-old Johnny came down from his bedroom and stumbled into the kitchen to get a bowl of his favorite cereal, Alpha-Bits. When he got to the table, he was surprised to see the cereal box was knocked over and the alphabet letters spelled, "Take out the garbage." Recalling a recent high school biology lesson, Johnny didn't attribute the message to his mom. After all, he'd just been taught that life itself is merely a product of mindless natural laws. If that's the case, Johnny thought, why couldn't a simple message like "Take out the garbage, Mom" be the product of mindless natural laws as well? Maybe the cat knocked over the box, or an earthquake shook the house just right so everything fell out. No sense jumping to conclusions. Johnny didn't want to take out the garbage anyway. He didn't have time for house chores. This was summer vacation. He wanted to go to the beach. Mary would be there. Since Mary was a girl Scott liked, too, Johnny wanted to get to the beach early before Scott. When Johnny arrived, he saw Mary and Scott walking hand in hand along the shore. As he followed them at a distance, he looked down and saw a heart drawn in the sand with the words, "Mary loves Scott," scrawled inside. For a moment, Johnny felt his heart sink, but thought, oh yes, his biology class rescued him from this deep despair. Maybe this is just another case of natural laws at work, he thought. Perhaps sand crabs or an unusual wave pattern just happened to produce this love note naturally. No sense accepting a conclusion he didn't like. Johnny would just have to ignore the corroborating evidence of the hand-holding. Comforted by this fact that the principles he learned in his biology class could help him avoid conclusions he didn't like, Johnny decided to lay down for a few minutes to get a little sun. As he put his head back on his towel, he noticed a message in the clouds: "Drink Coke." The white puffy letters revealed in the sky blue background. Unusual cloud formation, Johnny thought. Swirling winds, perhaps. No, Johnny couldn't play the game of denial any longer. Drink Coke was a real thing. A message like that was a sure sign of intelligence. It couldn't be the result of natural forces because natural forces have never been observed to create messages. Even though he never saw a plane, Johnny knew there must have been a skyrider up there recently. Besides, he wanted to believe this message. The hot sun left him parched and thirsty for Coke. Sound familiar? I'm trying to lose my voice, sorry. As we'll see, we'll get into this as we go, but as we'll see, this is really the mindset that so many atheists carry. That the evidence is clear, but they want to deny it because it doesn't go along with their philosophy. So, simple life. Is there such thing as a simple life? Where we're told at the beginning, the first life form was a very simple life form, right? Naturalistic biologists assert that messages far more complicated are the mindless product of natural laws. And we'll get into those messages here in a minute. They assert that life generated spontaneously from non-living chemicals by natural laws without any intelligent intervention whatsoever. Since the 1950s, advancing technology has enabled scientists to discover a tiny world of awesome design and astonishing complexity. Now, last week, if you remember, now that I can say the word, we talked about the anthropic principles of physics, which again were the things that make this world inhabitable. This week, we're going to talk about the anthropic principles of biology. So what is this principle? Let's start with the simplest life form, the one-celled amoeba. We're told this amoeba, or something like it, came together by spontaneous generation in a warm little pond somewhere on the very early Earth. Everyone's heard this in biology classes, right? This was done with no intelligent guidance whatsoever. This is a theory of macroevolution. As they like to put in the book, he says, from the infantile to the reptile to the gentile. Or another way, from the goo to you via the zoo. Really great way to remember that. So believers of this theory are called by a lot of different names. Naturalists, evolutionists, materialists, Darwinists, humanists, and of course atheists. So the big question, is this theory true? Did some kind of simple organism come from a warm lake? So we're going to dig into specifically macroevolution more next week. But despite all the ideas that atheists have about the first living species having one common ancestor, there's one really big supreme problem for Darwinists. And it's explaining the origin of the very first life. Again, we'll deal with the species and stuff next week, but let's talk about the first life. For unguided, naturalistic macroevolution to be true, then there had to be some kind of a spontaneous generation of this first life. The problem with this simple first life, as they say, the single-celled amoeba specifically, is it's by no means simple. So what do we mean by that? 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick discovered DNA, the chemical that encodes instructions for building and replicating all living things. I'm not a big expert on DNA. We don't have a lot of time to get into it in depth, but we know that it's made up of 4 elements. They, adenine, T, thymine, C, cytosine, and G, guanine. This all determines the unique genetic makeup of a living entity. These 4 words, these 4 letters form a code that makes up the genetic makeup of a living entity. This message is an example of specified complexity, which means it's very complex, but for a very specific reason. A message, in other words. Not only is it complex, but it has a very specific message. In regard to the one-celled amoeba, a creature so small, get this, a creature so small, it would take several hundred of them just to make it an inch lined up. Richard Dawkins, the Darwinist we all know well about, he admits that the message found in just one cell nucleus, not even the whole thing, one cell nucleus of the amoeba is more than 30 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica combined. Has anyone ever seen those encyclopedias or any encyclopedia? Not real small. I know, they're not a thing these days. They're not real small. Very complex. Now, again, this is just a nucleus of this one-celled amoeba, right? An entire amoeba has as much information in its DNA for 1,000 complete sets of this encyclopedia. So who still believes that all of those encyclopedias were written by some dumb naturalistic force? Go back to our intro story. Take out the garbage mom. What are the odds that that simple message was done by natural forces over time? Yeah, we're-
got a lot of boxes of cereal to do that.
Yeah, a lot of boxes of cereal. But we're told to believe that 1,000 complete sets of 30, do your math, just happened naturally. So how could natural laws write such a complex and long message? Darwinists literally have no answer. They have a few minor ideas here and there, but they have no substantial answer for this. So we'll investigate some of the origin of the first life. Evolutionists and creationists speak as if they know beyond any doubt how the first life came into existence. Both can't be right, as we talked about before, it contradicts. So which one is right? Now we all know that no human observed the first living species. We believe the first living person was Adam. He didn't observe his own creation. So it's safe to say no human has actually observed it. So the emergence of the first life was a one-time, unrepeatable historical event. If we can't directly observe the past, what scientific principles can we employ to help us discover what the first life was like? The answer from science: forensic principles. Forensic principles. We must piece together the evidence. Obviously, again, we can't go back in time. Think of law enforcement. They can't somehow go back in time and see a crime committed. They have to piece it together. We have to do the same thing. The main principle in forensic science is the principle of uniformity, which holds that causes in the past are like the same causes we see today. It makes sense, right? You drop something, you drop a Coke, what's going to happen? It's going to explode. So let's first start with the Grand Canyon. What caused it? Did anyone see it being formed? Using the principle of uniformity, we can conclude natural processes formed the Grand Canyon, particularly water erosion. We see it all the time. We can and do observe these processes today, so it's reasonable to conclude that that's a natural cause. What about these guys? What caused it?
More erosion.
More erosion. There you go. Common sense tells us that we would never suggest that the presidential faces were made by some natural cause. It took intelligence. We only see intelligent beings create sculptures like this. Right? Anybody disagree? So again, using observation, using what we know, how history repeats itself in this principle. So we rightly conclude intelligent being created Mount Rushmore. In the same way, when we look at the first one-celled life, the principle of uniformity tells us that only intelligent causes could have assembled the equivalent of 1,000 encyclopedias. Natural laws never have been observed to create simple messages, not even drink Coke. It can't even do 2 words. If it can't do 2 words, how can it do over 1,000 encyclopedias? Spontaneous generation of life has never been observed. If it happened once in the past, why doesn't it still happen today? If life came out of a little pond, why aren't we still seeing similar things today? Why was it a one-time event? Scientists have been unable to combine chemicals in test tubes and arrive at a DNA molecule, much less actual life. Scientists intelligently contrive experiments, and they still can't do what we're told mindless natural laws did. So, okay, let's say that one day scientists do somehow create life. They create a one-celled amoeba. What does that actually prove?
The scientists can create life.
What else? Yes, that's the most isn't it? You're right. I'm looking for a different word though. Intelligence.
I wouldn't consider some scientists intelligent. I said I don't consider some scientists intelligent. So.
I don't disagree. I do not disagree. Yeah, so let's say, okay, scientists create some kind of simple life. All that does is back up what we're saying. It takes intelligence. It's not happening naturally. By the way, we're going to have a lot of quotes because I think the atheists and all those, they say it well. They show their own problem. Richard Dawkins, in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, writes, "Biology is a study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose." You think? 2 pages later, he says this. He's describing these creations, the intricate architecture and precision engineering of the physical world. And then after that, he flatly denies that human life or anything else was ever designed. So he essentially says everything looks designed, everything looks like it was made for a specific purpose, but there's no way that's the case. And we'll get into why he says that here in a minute. Another one. Francis Crick, who co-discoverer of DNA, wrote a warning in a memo to fellow biologists saying biologists must constantly keep in mind what they are seeing is not designed but rather evolved. Why do they need to keep it in mind constantly?
Because of their scientism.
Because they're brilliant. Yes, they're brilliant. So in response to this memo, a intelligent design movement guy, his name is Philip Johnson, he observed Darwinian biologists must keep repeating that reminder to themselves because otherwise they might become conscious of the reality that is staring them in the face, trying to get their attention. So they have to repeat this thing over and over again. Don't lose sight of your philosophy. The complexity of DNA is not only a problem for Darwinists, there are several other problems. Its origin is also a problem. See, DNA relies on proteins. It has to have proteins for its production. And proteins have to have DNA for their production. So which came first? The chicken or the egg? They have to have each other. Yet we're told these things came separately. Plain and simple, it's bad science. So what's the difference between good science and bad science? Despite the claims by the media and secular scientists, the creation-evolution debate, it's not at all about religion versus science. It's not about Bible versus science. It's about good science versus bad science. This becomes increasingly clear the more we study it, the more we see it, the more, in their own words, we'll see a lot more of it, that they're practicing bad science. It's also not about faith versus reason. It's about reasonable faith versus unreasonable faith. Science is the search for causes. So logically, there's only 2 types of causes, either natural or intelligent, just like the Grand Canyon, Mount Rushmore that we just discussed. The problem Darwinists have is they preload their conclusions to rule out intelligent design from their assumptions. They won't consider any other options. They rule it out before they even look at the evidence. When I was preparing for this, I remembered, I'm sure everyone's kind of seen this in one way or another, my biology textbook from college. I highlighted, you can look at it later, I'm not going to read it right now. I highlighted 2.5 paragraphs that they devote to intelligent design throughout the whole book. And essentially they say, it's not scientific, we can't prove it. If there is something that it designed everything, it's outside of time and reality and space. Remember that? So we're not even going to discuss it, we're not going to consider it. It's not a thing. And they moved on to evolution. Check it out for yourself. Spontaneous generation is what critics of evolution call a just so story. It's just so because we say it is. That's what we're going to believe. Evolutionists provide no evidence to support their spontaneous generation. It isn't supported by empirical observation or forensic science principles at all. It's just so because life exists. And since intelligent causes are ruled out in advance, there's no other possible explanation. So I thought science was supposed to be discovering truth, following it where it takes you. And again, we'll see this more in a moment. They don't follow where it takes them. They come into it with their own ideas, their own bias, and that's what they stick to. After more than 30 years of research into the origin of life, biochemist Klaus Dose admitted his research had led to a better perception of the immensity of the problem of the origin of life on Earth, rather than to its solution. At present, all discussions on the principal theories and experiments in the field either end in stalemate or in a confession of ignorance. Why do you think that is? 30 years of research, and he's essentially saying he's gotten nowhere on it. If you don't know where you're going, you're ever going to get there? He's not going to look at the evidence. Similarly, Francis Crick laments, every time I write a paper on the origin of life, I swear I will never write another one, because there's too much speculation running after too few facts. The evidence for intelligent design is so incredibly strong that prominent evolutionists, wait for it, have actually suggested alien deposit of human life. Has anyone ever heard this? Believe it or not, it's a thing. There's a guy named Fred Hoyle. He's credited with kind of inventing this theory. After calculating that the probability of life arising from spontaneous generation is 0. So, instead of saying, well, maybe this isn't the right way, we should look at something else, like intelligent design, he decided to say, well, aliens. Aliens dropped off the first one-celled amoeba. Other than the obvious, what's wrong with that argument?
Where did the alien
All you do is push the argument back to another place. We still have the problem of, okay, where did life come from? It defeats itself. Chandra, that name, admits that evolutionists are acting on blind faith when he said, the emergence of life from a primordial soup on Earth is merely an article of faith that scientists are finding difficult to shed. There is no experimental evidence to support this at the present time. Indeed, all attempts to create life from non-life, starting from Pasteur, have been unsuccessful. So if all these years, especially since the 50s when we really got decent technology, microscope and all to understand these things, 70 plus years, we haven't been able to create any form of life whatsoever. And again, we're told to believe that dumb, unintelligent, natural causes brought life. Microbiologist Michael Denton, an atheist, adds, the complexity of the simplest known type of cell is so great that it's impossible to accept that such an object could have been thrown together suddenly by some kind of freakish, vastly improbable event. Such an occurrence would be indistinguishable from a miracle. Well said. Again, we've seen Darwinists allow their ideology to overrule observation and reason. We see it again and again. This is the very thing that they accuse us of doing, don't they? They tell us that we can't see the truth because all we want to see is God or our beliefs or whatever. This is the very thing that they do. So in response to one critic, I didn't put this up here, but Richard Dawkins wrote, our philosophical commitment to materialism and reductionism is true, but I would prefer to characterize it as philosophical commitment to a real explanation, as opposed to a complete lack of an explanation, which is what you espouse. So there he admits it. Our commitment to materialism and reductionism is true. What would you call that? What if I, as a Christian, talking to an atheist, said my commitment to my Christian beliefs is true? What would he call me? Closed-minded. Yet they're admitting the same exact thing. Don't doubt it. It's a religion. And we'll see this a lot more. Again, what happened to unbiased scientists that followed? I'm really inspired. I can't remember the gentleman's name that we've had out here. He's brilliant. Works for Paul J. Express, works for NASA. Everybody.
Red hair.
Red hair's one of them.
Dave Miller?
Yes.
Or Jeff Miller?
Dave Miller, I believe.
Dave Miller.
Anyway, he talks about a story Assuming that's what I'm thinking of. Talks about a story how he was an atheist and he was going to be the guy to disprove Christianity. Really smart guy.
Michael Happ.
Michael Hall. There it is. Yes, Michael Hall. Really smart guy. He was going to disprove Christianity. The thing I love about his story, not only obviously its ending, he's a Christian, but how he got there. He looked at the evidence, he weighed it, and the evidence is what changed him. He didn't come into it saying, I'm an atheist, I'm going to stay this way forever. The evidence changed him. That is science. That's what being a scientist is about. There's a lengthy quote I'm going to read real quick. It's a little too long to put up here. But this is also very, very telling of where these scientists are mentally and what drives them. Darwinist Richard Lewontin at Harvard University writes a whole complete confession about this on, I believe, the university website at Harvard. He says, our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to the understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of tolerance of the scientific community from unsubstantiated just so stories, because we have a prior commitment to materialism. So again, there's more, but he's saying they accept all these supernatural things that they see, the things that don't make any sense in science, the things that don't compute, if you will, they don't add up. Because just as Richard Dawkins says, we have a prior commitment to materialism. He goes on to say, it is not that the method and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept the material explanation of the phenomenal world beyond, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our prior adherence to material causes. We are forced by our prior adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and to a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. This last part is very telling. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Does anyone else detect any bias here?
Maybe a little.
Maybe a little.
Almost fanatical.
You know, I think you hit on something with your biology book. It made me think of the historical, because nobody looks at a security camera of what's happening now and goes, I don't see an evidence of a crime. You got to look at your security camera footage of what happened already. Go back. You got to look at the historical or the forensic. You know, and I think it's the forensic evidence of what happened. And when scientists look at that, but a lot of atheistic scientists or humanistic scientists, they look at, well, I don't see anything now, so it couldn't have happened. Or I don't see anything evidence of God right now. Well, there's two types of sciences. There's observational science, and then there's the historical, the forensic science that studies what was, you know?
Yeah. And someone mentioned Brad Harrod. I don't know if you guys know this. He recently finished his textbook. It's high school level biology. Not only your standard biology book, but it's full of these evidences in biology. I haven't read it yet. It's on my short list. If you have kids or grandkids, or check it out, especially if you're homeschooling or anything like that. We'll have to leave it up here if anyone wants to look at it.
There's another atheist that was a member of the church, John Clayton, and he read himself out of atheism and conducted a number of seminars throughout the nation. And he also published some material for teenagers. And he basically, his seminar was, Does God Exist? So you can look for some of the material from John Clayton.
Absolutely. If anyone follows Apologetics Press, I love them. They're awesome. They have a really good 3-hour debate between Kyle Butt, one of their main guys, and I can't remember the atheist, but it's really good on the existence of God. I recommend checking it out. So the event required to get the atheistic theory of macroevolution off the ground, the spontaneous generation of the first life, is believed because of false philosophical assumptions disguised as science. Not because there's legitimate scientific observations that support this spontaneous generation. So we're going to get back into the philosophy that actually, ironically, I taught a couple weeks ago. Keep coming back. So you hear it again. What about time? Give time a chance. Or give chance a chance. So okay, let's deal with time for a minute. Darwinists dismissed the conclusion that intelligence was necessary for the first life by suggesting that more time would allow natural laws to do their work. I've heard this argument quite a bit. So why is this nonsense? Is it nonsense?
They claim the world's been around for millions of years.
Yep.
I mean, how much time do we need?
Absolutely.
Part of the issue too, though, is this whole concept was constructed way back when science didn't understand as much of the complexity as they're actually. I mean, back when Urey and Miller did their first experiment and claimed that they had created life, you know, people thought that the cell was basically a blob with a membrane. And the complexity is, you know, the time problem, a simple protein, there's been statistical work done that the chances of a protein ever forming on its own are 1 to the 167, which there's 1 to the 159 atoms, they believe, in the universe. So it doesn't matter how much time there is. You know, time is their enemy, actually.
Absolutely.
Because if a protein forms, well, it's got to have a lipid, and it's got to have a carbohydrate, and it's got to have other things, and it's not just going to sit around there for millions of years waiting for a carbohydrate to come along.
Right. Yeah, and if you remember a couple weeks ago, we talked about the second law of thermodynamics. If you remember what that is, that essentially says over time, the more time there is, the more disorder there is. Nature causes disorder, it doesn't organize things. Simple example, I really like their example. Let's say you have a box full of confetti. The confetti is red, white, and blue. You go up 1,000 feet in the air, dump it all out. What are the chances that that red, white, and blue confetti is going to form an American flag? It's possible. The components are there, right? It's possible. So according to the time thing, okay, we'll give it more time. Let's go to 10,000 feet. Throw it out there. What's going to happen? The time, the extra time to hit the ground, did it help or hurt? Yeah, natural causes disorder. More time, disorder. You can think about anything. You drop something right here, dump it out right here, it's going to be a pretty neat pile. Drop it from top of the building, it's going to be a bigger pile. Piles only going to get bigger.
I think it also kind of flies in the face of the second law of thermodynamics. Things are breaking down, which is a scientific law that they can prove, and which actually makes a lot of sense based on the Bible with, things are breaking down since the fall, Adam and Eve's first sin, that kind of thing. So for things to start to go from a single cell to us, that makes no sense. Us to a single cell makes more sense. Like we would break down to that,
Right.
but not the other way around.
Yeah.
And more time just makes that even harder because you're fighting that natural law.
Yeah. There's a lot more we could say about all this. We gotta keep pushing. So what about chance? Can all the incredible specified complexity that we see and know today be explained by chance? What does that even mean? Michael Behe has said that the probability of getting one protein molecule by chance would be the same as a blindfolded man finding one marked grain of sand in the Sahara Desert 3 times. Not impossible, definitely not likely. Now, did you catch what he said though? Getting one protein molecule. A protein molecule is not life. So if you throw life in there, it's even less likely. So I would argue the chance is actually 0, because chance is not a cause. What is chance? It's a word we use to describe a mathematical possibility. That's it. Chance isn't a cause. Chance doesn't do anything. It has no power. He argues that it's used to cover our ignorance. And I like the analogy, chance is what rocks dream about at night. Nothing. So to say chance doesn't really mean anything. It's just another example of bad science. Back to the philosophy. Science is definitely a slave to philosophy. I think we've seen that in the quotes that I've shared tonight so far. Darwinianism has built their science on a very, very false philosophy. It's their secular religion of naturalism that leads them to ignore the empirically detectable scientific evidence for design. So naturalists will tell us that science can account for everything. Can it? Can science account for virtually everything? Can it give us understanding into everything? Here are 5 beliefs that cannot be proven by science. Mathematics and logic. Science can't prove them because it presupposes them. You can't prove science, or you can't prove math or logic using a scientific method. Metaphysical truths. Are there other minds out there other than mine? I know I have a mind. How do I know all of you guys have a mind? Some people don't act like they have a mind. But you can't prove scientifically about the mind. What is the mind? What makes you you? There's nothing you can prove scientifically there. Ethical judgments. You can't prove by science that the Nazis were evil. You can't. Morality isn't subject to the scientific method. You say something's wrong, I say it's not wrong. Who's right? Prove it. This one's newer for me. I read a paper from Apologetics Press again, Aesthetic Judgments. I never thought about this one. But this is another one, they call it the aesthetic argument. This is another one atheists have a real hard time with. According to atheism, according to evolution, it's our being, our focus as far as being alive is to stay alive and reproduce so that our species can continue. So if that's the case, why and how can we appreciate beautiful things? Doesn't make sense. If you're like Grant and you like to walk through fields of flowers, they can't explain how that makes sense, because it doesn't do anything. Unless you're going to eat the flowers, it doesn't do anything for you. You shouldn't care about it. Ironically, science itself. The belief that the scientific method discovers truth can't be proven by the scientific method itself. It can't. The scientific method of searching for causes by observation and repetition is but one means of finding truth. As we touched in the past weeks, non-scientific philosophical laws, such as the laws of logic, help us discover truth as well. It's been a few weeks, but he's back. Our Roadrunner. Darwin's claim science is the only source of objective truth. The claims to be an objective truth isn't scientific truth at all. The statement's philosophical in its nature, and it can't be proven, so therefore it defeats itself. You tell me science can prove everything, okay, prove it. You can't. It's a philosophical argument, and therefore it defeats itself. Science is built on philosophy. Bad philosophy results in bad science. Good philosophy requires good science. Why is that? Science can't be done without philosophy. Philosophical assumptions are utilized and are formed in search for causes, and therefore they can't be the result of them. So what does that mean? you're trying to figure out what's causing something. You have to have some kind of philosophical idea or understanding to direct you, to get you started on at least a direction. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. So it's built on philosophy. In the case that we've been talking about, if they believe that naturalism is the only cause, that's their philosophy. And that's the direction they're going to go. Philosophical assumptions can dramatically impact scientific conclusions. Again, we've seen this in the quotes. We've seen scientists that just contradict themselves, or they say they won't consider certain options because it goes against their preconceived ideas. If they believe beforehand that natural causes are the only possibility, then that's the only thing that they're going to come to. Science doesn't really say anything scientists do. We've heard Dalen say this a few times. Data is always interpreted by scientists. When they let their preferences or philosophical assumptions dictate their interpretation of the evidence, then they let their ideology dictate their conclusions. Materialism makes reason impossible. So here's 5 reasons that it does that. As we discussed, there's a message written in life that can't be explained materially. The message of the DNA. This message can't be explained by non-intelligent natural laws any more than the message in a book can be explained by non-intelligent laws of ink and paper. You just can't. You can't come to this detailed message using natural laws. Human thoughts and theories are not composed only of materials. Can you point to where your thoughts come from? Yes, your brain works in it, but that's not where our thoughts come from. The chemicals in our brain don't create thoughts. They play a role, but they don't create thoughts by themselves. They don't have theories and emotions that come from these chemicals. If life were nothing more than materials, then we'd be able to take all the materials of life, which are the same exact materials found in the earth, and make a living being. So everything that, all the materials and minerals of things that are in the earth are the same exact materials and minerals that are in us. Sound like any scripture you might know of? How are we formed?
Genesis 1.
We were formed from the dust, from the dirt. You know, I picture, I don't know what it's like this or not, but I picture God almost grabbing, mud and forming us, breathing life into us. So theoretically, if everything was natural, we could get all these materials and create a living being. We can't do that. Materialism true, then everyone in all human history who's ever had any kind of spiritual experience is completely mistaken. Everybody. Jesus, the apostles, people who have any kind of spiritual experience are wrong. But if just one experience is true, then materialism is false. Materialism is true, then reason itself is impossible, as we said. Turek, whenever he's giving his presentations at universities, he says, if that's true, then all we are is moist robots. We're not capable of anything. If I have an opinion and you have an opinion, neither one of us can say anything's wrong because we're programmed to believe that way or to do certain things. So wrapping up, Darwinists who claim to be champions of truth and reason have made truth and reason impossible by their theory of materialism. Plain and simple. The very fact that Darwinists think they have reason to be atheists actually presupposes that God exists. How so? Because reasons require that this universe is a reasonable one. That presupposes there's order, logic, design, and truth. But order, logic, design, and truth can only exist and be known if there is an unchangeable objective source and standard of such things. So again, if there's no standard, then what is there? To say something is unreasonable, they must know what reason is. To say something is not designed, they have to know what design is. To say something is not true, they have to know what truth is. Like all non-theistic worldviews, Darwinism borrows from the theistic worldview in order to make his own views intelligible. They've got a follow-up book called Stealing from God. It's about this exact thing. It goes in a lot better detail, but it talks about how atheists steal from God in order to prove in their mind that there is no God, using the very things that prove there is a God. So by using the self-evident first principles of logic and the correct principles of scientific investigation, we discovered the last few weeks that this is a theistic universe. If this is a theistic universe, then naturalism is simply false. If you have the wrong context, you may come to the wrong conclusion about the evidence you're observing. Again, they deny that there's even a possibility that there is intelligent design out there. So, let me leave you with some great wisdom here. William Dembski. The creature looks like a dog, smells like a dog, barks like a dog, feels like a dog, pants like a dog. The burden of evidence lies with the person insisting the creature is not a dog. As silly as that might sound, it tells us we need to be on the offensive, not on the defensive. Make them prove all the evidence points to design. It's so clear. Make them prove that everything happened naturally. Put the burden of proof on them. All right, next week, Richard's going to pick up from here and we'll get more into macroevolution, how supposedly different species came from different species, and all of that around there. Any final thoughts at all?
I think any lawyer will probably tell you, I'm not one, but I know there's others that are into this apologetics, and they say, well, the burden of proof is always on the person making the claim. So if an atheist comes and says there is no God, okay, cool, prove it. Prove it. And they can't.
It's really easy for us to get defensive, and all of a sudden we try to play defense immediately, and they're just sitting there laughing at us.
Right. Good call.
Anything else?
The origin of life, there's a Dr. James Tour in Houston, Texas, who's a synthetic biochemist, and he has some really great material. You can just get on YouTube, it's Dr. James Tour. And I'll warn you, he's an older creationist,
Yeah.
but on this issue, on origin of life, he was excellent.
Anything else? You want to look at these textbooks or anything, feel free. 2 more books, Reasonable Faith. I haven't read either of these. William Lane Craig, Cold Case Christian. I've heard a lot about this one. I haven't read it yet. But
Yeah, both very good. They're on each other's, sites and websites, but Cold Case Christianity is just like it's looking at the reasonable evidence, why the Gospels are true, and then William Lane Craig is quoted in this, I think this chapter 2, kind of along the lines of this book here.
awesome. Thumbs up your too. Anyone wants to take a picture of them real quick or anything like that?